Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Kriyananda, beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence. Help us to know that life has only one purpose: to be in tune with the divine presence within and radiate that presence to everyone we meet, in everything we do. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Amen. Let's take just a few minutes, silent meditation, just to put our consciousness in tune with one another, in tune with the masters who inhabit this temple. With the divine presence within. Om, peace. Amen. I was trying to see if I can lose my scarf again. I was trying to think before I came here, like what might be interesting to share. And it's, first of all, I've been back in California for about 10 days now, which seems like a really, really long time. And everything else that happened before is already into the past. One of the most fascinating and amazing things about travel is the absolute illusion of time and space. Just everything is in the now. Excuse me, I'm going to have to go get a Kleenex before I can go on. Gave me a cold, but I'm almost over it. I think I'm going to stand up. I just feel more awake and ready standing up. On the last days of travel, thank you very much. I hope I don't need more than one. Many of you know on this trip, we took, Dambar went to play music, as always, and a gentleman named Atul from Houston, Texas, went to run the video camera, because no matter how much people promise us that they'll film, they have other priorities. One of the Swamiji always had this habit of making fun of wrong attitudes, and when we were all feeling like strong and very capable, he would sometimes make jokes about attitudes that we would be inclined to have more seriously when we were feeling more vulnerable. And so I've taken up that habit because I find it very helpful. And one of the watchwords of travel is that nobody cares about me but me. And so in terms of video, people would promise that they would film and they would promise that they would give us, but they had many other priorities because nobody cares about me but me. So to make it work, we took our own cameraman and own equipment because we've had this for a long time. So Atul traveled with us. Atul's only been with Ananda for about a year, so it was really a toss into the deep end. And he was marvelously perfect. He was a wonderful travel companion, very good spirit, very good energy every single day. And on the very last night when we were in Rome with Yogindra and Gitanjali, who are a couple who've lived in Italy, Italian man, American woman, they've lived in our Ananda CC community for 30-some years. Gitanjali helped arrange all of the Italian part of the trip, and she traveled and was a translator the whole time. Italian is her second language, but because English is her first, she could always understand what I was saying. And Atul just asked the question, what are the most memorable moments? He was asking all of us at the table, the four of us, what are our most memorable moments from the journey? And it was, it was an obvious question to ask, but it was really interesting for me. I've been on the road, I think 9 weeks at that point. We had been, I think, like in 7 countries or something like that, counting Hungary and Croatia, which we just drove through on the way to something else. I don't know how many talks we gave, we just didn't even keep track. And he asked me, and it was so interesting, because I couldn't pull out of the experience anything in particular. Just nothing. It was all, and it wasn't that I couldn't remember it. I have a fairly good memory, although I must admit, when somebody asked me a question, Sonia, who lives here, Hazi's wife, she's from Serbia, and we were 9 days in Belgrade, Serbia. So she asked me naturally, what did I think of Serbia? This was a few days ago. And really, I had to stand there. And I had to think, now, who would I have met in Serbia? Like, what did the place look like? And I could get the people. And then when I got the people, I could get the place. Then when I got the place, I could get the rest of the audience. But there was very little that I could answer, except to say this person was lovely and that person was lovely. And one of the things that happened in Belgrade is a woman saw this lady in blue, which was me, walking down the street. She only knew me from Instagram. She had no idea I was in Serbia. She just recognized that it must be me on the street, and then managed to figure out that I was giving a program somewhere and showed up that night. She felt like a sister from forever. That happened in Serbia, so I can pull that one out. But when Atul asked that question, it was actually, I was actually extremely happy that the whole experience had just been one flow of energy, except for going on pilgrimage to where Padre Pio lived and where his body was buried. And that was like fireworks all around it as a completely different experience. So when I was thinking about coming to talk to you tonight, there are details and it is fun. What is really happening with Ananda, and of course I'm seeing it firsthand, but we are really in another dimension of Master's work here. I mean, think about it, really. Master came to America in 1920. So that is just over 100 years. That is really not long when you're talking about the change of yugas, which is a 24,000-year cycle that we have to go through. When you're talking about transforming the whole consciousness and culture of a planet. When you're talking about deathless masters in the Himalayas who are influencing the fate of nations, things like that. 100 years is just goes by just like that. And for 50 of those years, Ananda has existed, and I myself have been involved. So we are so young, we are so tiny. And what's happening now is that this thing, which just started as this little rural community up in the Sierra Nevada, which a few of us, were actually part of that experience. But even then, Swamiji, I remember him saying at a certain point, I used to talk about what I saw for Ananda's future. He said, but I found that instead of inspiring people, it frightened them. That was the phrase that he used, so he just didn't talk about it in the way that he would have otherwise. But what I saw traveling, and we went first to Italy, and we were in the Assisi community for maybe a week, maybe less than that. Then we got in this van, this little box on wheels, little blue box. They call it Sanghi because it's it's a member of the Sangha, this car, and it's the car that takes everybody all around any place that you can drive, which is quite a lot of Europe. You can just drive. So we got in that car, and for like 2.5 weeks, I think, we were just in various places in Italy, and we would go in and do our little story. Dambar would play his beautiful music, and Atul would film, and I would talk. And then we'd sort of get back in the van, and we'd go somewhere else. And the van itself became one of the main localities, I wasn't a driver, and besides which I had no idea where we were. So I didn't really, I look out the window occasionally, but mostly you were just in this entire world unto itself. This is a traveling circus. This is a band tour, whatever it is, it's the same thing. And what we would find is that Master is awakening people all over the planet, and all different kinds of people. Of course, you have the fun of looking into the eyes of someone that you can't exchange a word with because we don't speak the same language, although a lot of times you understand each other without that. But you see, everybody is just the same as us. I was very struck in an embarrassing way. I wrote about this in a letter when we were in Lugano, Switzerland. And Lugano is a place that I have been to a number of times on holiday with Swamiji. It was a place he used to like to go to for holiday. He used to go to the Dante Hotel. In fact, once when he was very ill, I was alone with him in the Dante Hotel, and he began to essentially run his life review and decide, reviewing all the different communities of Ananda. This was late at night. He was having congestive heart failure. He was having this, he was having that. Miriam told me, his nurse told me later, he could easily have died that night from 3 or 4 different causes. And this was actually right after his birthday in 2009, and it was the Brighu reading, the ancient sage from India, had predicted he would die at his birthday that year. I had gone to India thinking if it was his last birthday, I wanted to be there. And then we went on to Europe, and he was just terribly ill. So anyway, I'm in Lugano in the Dante Hotel, and just as it happened, I was the only one who was with him. He starts reviewing all of our communities and talking about who's in charge, and we were discussing who's running things and how they're doing. And finally I said, "Are you asking if it's okay if you die?" And he said, "Yes." And all I could think of was, not in the Dante Hotel, please. How will we ever make a like a mandir out of this room number 307 in the Dante Hotel in Lugano. Thank God he survived till the morning, and everything went on after that. He died much more appropriately in his own house 4 years later. But anyway, so I'd been to Lugano, but it was always in that context. It was going out for chocolate, things like that. So we had this hotel room, and people came. I didn't know anybody in that room. I don't think I'd met anyone in there except our own little group. And I was standing on the balcony of the hotel, looking. Switzerland is lovely and extremely orderly, and I remember going on the train through Switzerland years ago and seeing what do you call used tire lot, a lot where they had used tires, and they were all stacked. Like that. It's like, ooh, this is really, I don't know if I like this country or not. But I was standing there, and I realized this chauvinistic prejudice. Perhaps Americans are worse than others because we're so insular because of the size of our country. But I realized in this subtle way that I measured everything by how closely it mimicked the American way of doing it. And it was just like, it was terribly embarrassing. It's not like I'd ever been so gauche as to actually say it, but nonetheless, I became profoundly aware of how narrow our self-definitions are. And just because it's the way it's done in this country, that's just the way it's done in this country. The Swiss think they're proud of their ways. The Italians are proud of theirs. They're all much older than us. They all have longer traditions. But just because it's the one I'm used to. I remember when Master came to America and Sri Yukteswar said, don't think of yourself as an Indian and don't become an American. Take the best of every culture. And that's who we're trying to be. We're all trying to be world citizens. And what I would see, I was thinking of Lugano in particular, because somehow it was a unique moment. It's like this other wave, this other vibration is moving over the planet, and people who have the longing, and that would be the only word for it, who just are longing for something other, than just the ordinary way that life just progresses. And that somehow they hear this melody. It's like a bird song that you just suddenly in the forest, and you hear something that you didn't hear before. And all of a sudden you want to start singing according to that melody. And, there's no community in Switzerland. There's no temple. There's a couple of meditation groups. There's some very nice Ananda teachers there. Nice is not the right word. Lovely, really capable people who are very dedicated, have been dedicated for years. But the opportunities are smaller. People have to maintain, they just don't have the company that we have or the same opportunities. And of course, I thank God 100,000 times over for that. But what we were doing was like, we were a light show. In the best sense of the word, without any electricity, without any lasers. Damvara would just stand up in his way. He'd just open his mouth and he'd start singing these beautiful songs of Swamiji, and people could hardly believe it, because he's so completely innocent in the way he presents it. He's entirely about the music. The singer is there, and he's lovely. But the way he sings is entirely about the music. And so even if people didn't understand, although there was a lot of English in Switzerland, did they even translate? Yeah, they didn't translate into Italian. Gitanjali did. But you could tell, because I tell a lot of jokes, you could tell if they laugh at the English, you could tell exactly how much English there was in the room. As soon as there was a joke, I could gauge, And of course, it encouraged me to be funny if they were laughing right out. But there were a couple of people in Lugano, this one couple in particular, I'd never seen them before. And they had never been part of Ananda before. These are all the social media people, and they come from, people expect me to know geography. They came all the way from X, which was somewhere in Switzerland, farther away than where we were. And it was like they were so strong in the room, I had to make myself talk to the rest of the room. It wasn't that there was nobody else there putting out good energy, except their energy was so strong. And you know, when I first heard about reincarnation, which was decades ago, of course, like when I was 18, I remember once I was at Ananda Village, and at that point, our guest retreat was up at the meditation retreat, which was 3 or 4 miles up on that very isolated road, which it still is, all of that. And I gave a class. There was a hitchhiker, and somebody had given him a ride up there. And so he just stumbled into the class. He didn't know anything. And I was talking about reincarnation. And then after the class was over, he needed a ride back to the road, so he got in my car. I don't know whose car I was driving. I didn't have a car. I'm driving the car back, and he's sort of, when we're way in the most isolated part, he kind of looked around, and I could tell what he was thinking. Nobody else is listening now, and he says, "Do you really believe all that stuff?" I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I do." But you could see to him it just seemed crazy. But back when I was 18, it was like nothing else made any sense. We might as well try this one. There was a lot of reasons why I was drawn to it. I just recognized it. But I started acting as if reincarnation were true, then so many other things make so much sense. And when you start traveling, especially when you start traveling for Ananda, and your own brothers and sisters, your spiritual brothers and sisters, are just planted all over the place. And you just know, I know I'm not meeting you for the first time. That woman who came in Belgrade, who just saw me walking down the street, it was like, no, of course we've met before. What country were you in? Where were we? That's how I have to say to people, tell me where we were. What country were we in? What was the place? And then they can give me enough context, I can, like when I had to answer Sonia about Belgrade, and I had to stop and think who was there and what was it like. But it's, so we went through Italy for about 2.5 weeks. I'm trying to remember. There's a community called Ananda Giri, which is run by Janika and Bharati, this couple. And it's in this little medieval sort of town, very tiny town, up a little bit in the mountains. And people have been moving into that little town, buying and renovating some of the old buildings there. They've developed and refined. They have a beautiful meditation hall, and they're the closest thing, to another community really building in Italy. I mean, it is another community. It's just small and a little bit embryonic. And we spent a number of days there, just talking about all the different things that are involved in making an Ananda community work. And the Italians have such an enormous sense of beauty. We went to another fledgling community called Ananda Shanti, which is also, this couple bought this beautiful old mill, and then over a number of, I think a grain mill, and then over a number of years have, again, just made it absolutely beautiful. Every square inch is beautiful. I'm personally so utilitarian. Just get the rain out, so that the mosquitoes won't come in, just, sweep it. But there it's like everything is, and I must admit, it's absolutely gorgeous. But then what comes after? How do you really inspire people to have the courage to really give their lives to God? I mean, it's one thing to be interested. It's quite another to really, one, have the karma and the opportunity, and then to make the most of what's given to you. when we were in the early years of Ananda village and we were so impoverished, we're not really less impoverished now, we just operate, we go bankrupt at a higher level, is how I put it. There's more zeros after the numbers, We're never, I honestly thought Ananda would be more prosperous at this point than it is. I mean, look at us, we're enormously prosperous. But we're still just using what we have, and maybe that's just what it's always going to be. I'm told that Swami Shivananda always made sure that their organization was on the edge of financial collapse. He never wanted them to be comfortable. And Swamiji has said to us that Ananda's greatest test will be prosperity. Because he said when there's more, people start thinking about what they can get instead of what they can give. And he said, I'm not saying it will happen, it's not a prophecy. He said, but I'm saying it could happen. When you have less, you have to be creative all the time about what you can give and what you can offer. But I remember when I was briefly in charge of the publications business. Well, it was a little longer than brief, but I ran the publications business, and then I always say into the ground. and then Swami traded me and Shivani and put Shivani in charge, who had some sense of business. But when we were always having to make do with the least that we had because we just had so little. And I began to understand that one of the secrets of prosperity is to make absolute best use of what's given to you. If you squander what's given to you, why would God give you more? And of course, it's true financially, but I've also really come to see it's true spiritually. Whatever opportunities we have to serve, to give love to other people, to do our best to be instruments of the light, to think about how we can share the good news, then the more we give, the more opportunities we have to give. And it just works like that. If we sit and wait for somebody to give us some opportunity. So I see people in circumstances very, very different than mine. And I have to think, what will really help you? What is your actual next step? Because nobody's karma is accidental. I mean, nobody finds themselves somewhere when another spot would be better for them. And I mentioned this, and I wrote you wrote it in some of the letters that I wrote, but I'm not, what I'm learning on this is intuition. And I have a reasonable amount of intuition, but I'm really having to learn when I'm standing in a room and I don't know anybody in the room. And so there's no context in which I can think about this. I'm just remembering now, there was a transition also in my years of doing what I'm doing right now, where I've lived in this community now for 36 years, almost 37. That's a long time. And we built all of this, with classes and so on. And our classes would be 4, 5, 6 people, 7 people. We didn't have big crowds or anything like that. And it's just that they were the right 4, 5, 6, or 7, meaning they were serious, they gave their life to it, they took advantage of the opportunity. But I remember that when the crowds were that size, I could relate to everyone individually. And so I could still speak individually to people. And I remember vaguely, it might have even been when we moved in here, when all of a sudden the room was too big and I couldn't hold all the faces. And I'm only just remembering this just now. I remember being off balance, like having to feel the energy as a whole instead of all the individual people in it. And I made that transition. It wasn't too hard. But now, being in other countries where there's a whole room full of people whose minds are not even thinking in the same language as me, it's like, how do you know what to say? And then how do you trust? And I still feel, in many circumstances, this kind of war between some intellectual preconception and what people are asking of me. And I'm not comfortable yet. I'm better than I was in the spring when we were in South Africa and Japan especially, where there was so much cultural difference. And I let those thoughts. And so it's been, for me personally, that's been the part of it, which is to separate myself enough from preconception. It's really all about just being right in the moment without having to bring the past in and not anticipating the future. And then trusting the flow of energy. And altogether, which is why when Atul asked me what did I remember, I couldn't remember anything, because it's all just about wherever we are, that's exactly where we should be, And then all these other ideas would come in. I mentioned this on Sunday. As soon as I came back here, I started thinking about costumes for Christmas, and I have to work on the children's play, and there's all that mail there, and I never did pay this certain bill, and where is that bill? And then, all the other confusions that are going on in this community and lots of different things. And I could feel all of this, I'm in charge and I have to worry, energy coming in. And I thought, why? I've had 8 weeks of just, who cares what happens? I can't fix it anyway, but the illusion of control, when we're in our own atmosphere where we think we're running it. And it's very dicey because there are lots of things. I didn't have to take the initiative at all this whole time. I just would end up in this point, and this was the point at which it would start. I'd be wearing this little headset, and then my part would start. Up until that point, I was just, But as soon as I get here, where I have to take initiative all the time, with that initiative comes this other egoic sense. It's fascinating, isn't it? And you can see how far we all have to go in all of this. And you watch Swamiji, I watched Swamiji all that time, and he was so dynamic and so engaged. But he always said he never allowed anything to interrupt his inner peace. And I thought, oh my, that's something to aspire to, isn't it? And one thing I noticed about Swami, even when we were late, he would never hurry. He would move quickly if it was necessary, but he would never hurry. And even if he had to have lunch before we went somewhere, he would sit down and he would have lunch. He wouldn't just have lunch, you know what I mean? Because all that exists is what's in front of you in the moment, and that's all you ever have. So we went through, as I was saying, we went through Italy, and we spoke in a number of places that I can't remember. And then we came back for like 2 or 3 days. Then we got back in the box with a different driver, which was a Rudra, who's one of the shining lights, with his wife Mahia in Assisi. Rudra is from Croatia originally. And I've never had the pleasure of his company until this time, and the pleasure of his company is very, very great. He's an encyclopedia of Master's teachings. More than anyone I've ever met, he can just pull quotes out of his gigantic brain, and he would say things that I'd never heard. Just like, why do you think that's true? Where did that come from? And he would go ferret around and come up with this, and he drove the van, and he drove us. That was when we went to Serbia, and then we went to Slovenia, and then we went to the Czech Republic and to Vienna. And we went in and out of Vienna. And then we drove through Croatia and Hungary, it was almost as if Divine Mother said, okay, you're only going to be here for, you're only going to stop at this truck stop for 15 minutes. So we're going to give you cultural stereotypes that are going to be just like exactly what you would say. In both Hungary and Croatia, it was comical, actually. I mean, just the whole, if you have a picture in your mind of what it might be like, it was. That's the only thing I can say. But we just drove through. In Belgrade, we spent 9 days because Mukti and Narayan, the Serbian couple who are in charge there, are very, very deeply devoted, and they've been working very hard for many years, and they have really built up a beautiful community. And they have a darling little boy who's about 6, I think, and he's talk about reincarnation. He reads musical scores. He sits and reads musical scores, like he reads children's books, and then he reads musical scores, and he hums along with what he's reading, like this. And he plays the piano, but just like, he's just this big. He's just a tiny person, but very, very interesting. You just think, who are you and why are you here? And then he's born into this family that's so devoted to Master. And when we were in Belgrade, they rented like a Airbnb. I was in this little basement apartment. The guys were in one right nearby. And we just walked through the city. We never drove for all those days. So we just got to always be there. And it just became home like any other place. I actually learned my way around. I was sort of a joke because I'm geographically challenged in the best of times. But it was a serious problem that when they finally allowed me to walk the last 2 blocks to my own apartment, it was a great victory. I felt like a child who'd learned to use a spoon or something like that. But it wasn't exaggerated. I really didn't know where I was. And I finally was able to get enough symbols, enough words, signs. If I got enough words, I could figure out where we were. But, and there too, just people's gratitude for Master's teachings and the stories that they would tell you about what it meant to them to find Master's writings, to find Autobiography of a Yogi, to start doing Kriya Yoga. And you could just see it in their eyes. I think we had a Kriya there. Yeah, I think we had a Kriya there. And just people taking Kriya. Oh yes, Atul took Kriya for the first time. He was born in India. His family emigrated to Houston, Texas. So he grew up really in Houston, even though he still speaks Hindi and he's still Indian. He gets involved in Ananda and he takes his first Kriya in Belgrade. I thought it was just too perfect. It's just like when people ask, what's your story? He's going to always have a really good one. And then there was a little tiny baby that we did a baby blessing for this little 3 or 4 month old adorable entity in the little house of this little girl. And just, there's Papa and Mama, and all of their energy is focused on this tiny baby, and everybody in the room is focused on this tiny baby, and just the whole drama of life. It was just, and many times it was just overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming. And I believe this little child was made her parents wait for a long time before she came. So their devotion to her was extra poignant. And of course she had these beautiful eyes, and she won't always be that tiny and that dependent. And her father was, as fathers can be with their daughters, was just utterly putty in her hands, even though she's only this big. And you think about what a world this is, just everywhere. Then there was another little 3-year-old who was a bundle of energy, and his parents thought, oh, this baby blessing is so nice, let's do a baby blessing. The chance of really being able to hold that child still enough inside that center to actually get your hand on his head was really pretty remote. So we took some trip out to some old beautiful monastery and church where there was a river, so we got the little boy by the riverside, and we were a little better. And finally, everybody's gathered around, and all of a sudden he gets really serious. Just gigantic eyes, and you just so want to know, like, who are you? Where did you come from? And again, his parents, just this complete willingness to do anything that's required. It's just so on one hand, it's just so beautiful. There's no part of me that dismisses the human side of life at all. And then just to go to the other way elsewhere, I'm skipping over lots of things. The last week that we were in Italy, Narya, who's one of the leaders in Ananda Sisi, Paolo Tessetto, many of you know him because they lived in the U.S. for a while, Paolo and Laura and their 2 children. Narya, he's called now. He's he was talking about Padre Pio. Padre Pio is this modern saint. I think the Vatican has already started canonizing the process. I think he died in 1980 or 82. Yeah, the 80s. And he bore the marks of the stigmata on his hands. And he was so extraordinary that the Catholic Church moved him to a very remote parish in Italy up in the hills, which of course soon became a pilgrimage spot for thousands of people because he was so powerful. So Narya just mentioned about, going there on pilgrimage, and I said, oh, well, when I come next year, let's work this out. And then a few days later he says, we're going to go now. I mean, they're very spontaneous. They don't really plan things out as far ahead as we do. So all of a sudden, 20 of us in 2 vans just headed off the 4 or 5 hours to the place. So there's this old church there, which was there when he was there. And there's a choir loft, like, we have here. And in the choir loft, there's a crucifix like this. The whole thing is much smaller than here. For some reason, the crucifix has its back to the altar, to the congregation, and it's facing, the wall of the choir loft. And it was there, Padre Pio would pray in front of this crucifix, and it was there that the stigmata came to him. The details escape me, but there was a time when he had the pain of the wounds, but they didn't show. And then other times they began to show, and they would bleed. And then this particular crucifix was as art. It was good art. But Jesus was like, and he had big spikes through his hands and spikes through his feet, and he's kind of like this. I mean, it was the full-blown agony of being crucified. Honestly, it was horrible. And yet, I sat and meditated there for a very long time. Our last day, I just went and sat until we had to leave. It's just a tremendous experience. But I'm thinking, what is this? Why does Jesus have to suffer so much? Why did Padre Pio have to bear those wounds? And he had to walk in an awkward way because of the pain in his feet. And why is this considered such a sign of holiness? I have no answers. Honestly, I don't contemplate the abstractions all that much because I'm very practical. So I don't just wander around with questions that I can't answer. So it was very unusual for me to be trapped by that and to imagine, because I could feel the day before we went where Padre Pio's body is in this glass case, and they have his actual robes on him, and the face he has is actually a wax mask. So you have his face is there, it's his real body under it. I don't know what condition his body's in. Standing next to it, you could feel such an absolute sense of surrender. Just as I was saying to you, this is what I've been working on in this journey, which is how much of myself do I have to keep holding on to? How much of my own thoughts, my own preferences, my own fears, my own habits? When I was living at Ananda village, sometimes people would take 3 or 4 day seclusions. I could never take a seclusion that was less than 10 or 12 or 14 days, because it took me 3 or 4 days to get rid of Asha. In just 3 or 4 days to just get her to leave me alone so that I could just have a seclusion. If I did 3 or 4 days, it just never would start. It's just the way my psychology works. So all these years later, we're still trying to get rid of her, just to be free. But standing next to the body of Padre Pio, and you could just feel that nothing remained. That whatever, and so all of that was in my mind when I'm seeing this crucifix, and as his prayers, he gets to have the same wounds that Jesus had, and that's to help humanity. That's why it's there, because even watching that little tiny baby, there's so much that in me that knows how much lies ahead. The little baby is so protected, but she has a whole destiny. Everybody has a whole destiny, and a tremendous amount of that destiny is suffering. And of course, in the midst of all of this, the war, the Israeli war comes out, and the Ukrainian war is still going on, and we're right there. It's all so much closer. You could just, the wind blows in a certain direction, and it all comes over to where we were, especially when we were in Belgrade and then later in the Czech Republic. We're so close to all of that. And Ishani, because Ishani's the one who does my social media stuff, and her family's Israeli, so she was way into it. She has huge family in Israel, and she was in touch with them the whole time, and she's wanting me to, say something, write something, publish something to make everyone feel okay. Which I tried, actually. I sat down in Swami's house. We put up the camera. I was there for several hours. I recorded 2, 10-minute or 5-minute things. They were horrible. I just erased them. I couldn't make it okay. And somehow in my mind, I got this idea that I had to say something that was going to make everyone feel it was all right. It's not all right. It's horrible. And it was partly, I had a misunderstanding with Ishani as to what she wanted from me. The other part of it was, I wanted to make it all right. I want to tell people, oh, Master said this is going to happen. There's going to be all these upsets, but it's all to the good. But, it's one thing to have a glib philosophy. It's another to actually be standing in it. And that's what we get to do. We get to a certain point where we reach a certain level of practiced ease at a certain level of the spiritual life. And then something else happens. And then all of a sudden we have to ask ourselves, I've been talking about Jesus, for decades. Even from before we came here 37 years ago, but especially after I started living here, we were trying to, create a world, and I took on Easter and I took on Christmas, So I've been doing this for a long time. And all of a sudden I'm seeing Jesus crucified, and I don't understand it at all. It's just, I don't understand it at all. Why? What is this all about? And then all this, so I don't know. And I just finally said, Ishani, I can't do it. She, of course, it was fine. And I've still been looking for it. I've just been looking for it this whole time. But there is nothing. I don't think there's an answer until we get to a higher level of consciousness. Now, I want to add something to that, because this is the truth of it. I just got an email from a friend in another part of the world, and they were asking me a lot of very sort of convoluted philosophical questions about this and that, and I was trying to think how I was going to answer, and the answer that I thought of was, I never think about those things. I really don't, because I can't answer them. But that doesn't mean that I don't have great faith in God's plan. So it's not like it's not like I doubt God's plan, or that I doubt that Jesus had to be crucified, or that there was something why Padre Pio had to bear the marks. It's not like there's doubts, but there's just so much we just can't bring down to a human level. It just has to be a mind level. There just has to be this certainty from what we have experienced. And I think that is the answer that I'm looking for. What have we experienced about the power and the presence of God? And at what point do the pressures of life become so intense that we can no longer trust that? I've repeated this a lot of times, but it's so important. When Jesus challenged his disciples at the end of his life with the eat my body, drink my blood, Master said what was being tested was the disciples' faith in the experience they'd had of the consciousness and the love of Jesus. And could it stand up against something that completely bent their minds? And for those that it could, it was strong enough, then they became his soldiers and went out and spread the message of Christianity to the whole world, looking at the unbearable atrocities that man is inflicting upon itself right now. And it may get worse. Does that cause us to doubt God? Does it cause us to doubt the whole idea that Jesus and Babaji have planned the salvation of this age? That Master said these trials are necessary to bring people closer to God? And this is, I'm going from place to place, and oddly, people look at me in ways that I don't see myself. And I've had to just kind of, you can't keep repudiating. You have to, because it becomes insulting. I've written this book about Swami. This is especially true in Italy, because that book has been translated. It's much more popular in Italy than it is in the US. And so people immediately respond to me as the author of that book. And it actually has taken me a while to figure out what they're responding to, because once I finish that book, I feel like I just don't have any personal attachment to it, identification with it. It was written, and when I look at it, it's pretty good. But what they're experiencing is Swamiji. I read this quote from I think he's actually a fundamentalist Christian, but I loved it. He said, when people look at me, they see him, meaning Jesus. And because of that, they're attracted to him. He said, that's my only job. And so I feel, especially when I'm traveling to places where people have never met Swami, don't know anything about him, that I can tell them about Master, and I can tell them about Swami, and they'll be attracted to Master and to Swamiji. And then they express gratitude to the one who's talking. But there was a point there that wasn't that one. What was the point? No, it was something else. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Because my biography is notable. I've been on the path for all these years. I had all that time with Swamiji, all of that. That doesn't mean I know that much. That just means I've had a lot of opportunities to learn. And it's also just settling into that. Just settling into that we can't be anything except what we are. And it doesn't make any difference what we look like, what other people may think. It just doesn't matter. We just are what we are. And I just moving around from place to place, rooms full of strangers, getting back in the van and just going off. And, we were, thank God, we were just such a lighthearted, we just laughed so much of the time. Everything, so much was so funny. Everything was funny. So it was very childlike kind of fun just in the car. And we were piled up with luggage. Oh, in one point, it was Divine Mother's grace. We were going down the highway about, whatever it is. Arudra drove really fast. Whoa! No, Dambara was driving, actually. Down the road, because we were still in Italy. And all of a sudden he said, oh, the light's on, some door is open. So we're going like 50 miles an hour, and Atul starts to try to open and shut the side of the van, which was a really crazy idea. And he realized it was too, so he said really strongly, pull over to the side, pull over to the side. So Dambara pulls the car off, and there's fortunately a emergency lane right there. So now there's 2 or 3 lines of the autostrada, like this. And we're on this side. He opens and shuts the door. And so so then Dambara starts off like this. Turns out the back was open. Yeah. But we're on the side of the road. So we look backwards and we watch our luggage just exiting out of the back of the car. It was really very entertaining, And thank God we were on the side, because if we'd been in the middle of the highway, it could have just been catastrophic. But both of my suitcases, ba-boom, 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 they're very good. I'll tell you what brand they are. They were fine. The guitar stayed in the car. The camera equipment stayed in the car. But all of a sudden, all our luggage was just like, well, what do you know? And we have to stop and just start putting all that in again. But I mean, it was funny. My other favorite part of the whole thing was, it might have been, let me see, was it Belgrade? No, it wasn't Belgrade. It was the Czech Republic, that's what it was. We get the car completely packed. It's packed up like this, and Atul and I were always in the back seat, and we, between us and at our feet and on our laps, we had so much, I don't know where it all came from. We had all this stuff. We finally get all packed. We take a picture of the whole thing. We say goodbye to our host. We start up like this. We drive literally, our hosts have left. We drove one car length. And Dambara said, wow, look at that coffee shop. Boom, we pulled right back in. We took a 30-minute pit stop after 3 minutes of driving. So we had fun. We had a lot of fun. But everywhere we go, people really wanted something from us. It wasn't casual. They really wanted something. And we were able, by the grace of God, to offer them a lot, because they hadn't seen what it looked like, and the fact that there were always 4 of us or 5 or 6 sometime, it really helped people to see what it looked like. Just the way we related, the fun that we had, the humility that people express, the childlike enthusiasm, so what if everything goes wrong kind of energy, what have we got to lose? We're all here together, let's just enjoy ourselves, which we just take for granted, and they're just presenting this whole other way of being. And so the desire to go beyond yourself and help people more than you're able to, that's what you have to remain authentic, is actually the word that I want to use. This is just who we are. We went through Prague, we went through Slovenia, which was a lovely place there. I thought it was one of the few places where I felt like, oh, this is a home to me. That place just felt like I've been here before. And I wrote this in a letter about the woman. The big statue in the town was that of a poet, and the national anthem is about everybody loving everybody. And this woman who's a school teacher, she's founded TINA. She's made a Education for Life school there. She assigned to her students to research national anthems and see if they could find another country that had one like theirs. And they couldn't. And so there was just something about that place. I felt at home there. Like this might have been my home, speaking of reincarnation. Then to the Czech Republic, which, let's see, now where would it have been? Prague? Prague? Yes, I always get confused. which everyone says is a beautiful city. If you're just looking to go someplace and be a tourist, I highly recommend it. It was just absolutely lovely. But again, just the same thing, like everybody wants so much to be in tune with the divine and is just doing everything we can to be able to find that. And, there we are. We just have to do our best. It's not different here. It's a little exotic if you're being translated, but it's exactly the same. And those of us who have gotten a little bit of a window onto that, we just have a job to do. We were born for this. And it's very important that we carry it out for the sake of the world and for our own destiny, all of this. And it doesn't have to be. I have this unique, odd karma. I think I persuaded a lot of people to a lot of bad things over the course of many incarnations. That's what I finally figured out. And I have this huge debt, and I'm paying it back. And at some point it occurred to me, it'll stop. It'll be balanced, and then it'll stop. But right now I'm having to correct all of that. So this is a unique destiny. Not everybody has this. But every one of us has the opportunity to love each other. And I don't just mean, that kind of loving. I mean real. Like, I'm here for your soul, and I'll radiate the light to you as best I can. What a privilege. Yeah, what an absolute privilege. So, that's my story. Okay. And I don't have any, last time I came back with all these cookies from Australia, I had to leave all those things in Italy because for some reason I forgot to bring the duffel bag that would have made it possible to bring it all back. So I have nothing, absolutely nothing, except my goodwill for you. Okay. So thank you all very much for coming. Okay, that's it. Oh, she did.
Well, you were speaking, so.
No, Ishani, when I wasn't able to record for Ishani, she actually found some pieces from other things. She created those. They were my own words, but she pulled them out of other contexts because I wasn't able to give her anything. Yeah, so. Okay. And for those of you who don't know, these are my friends Julianne and Stu, her husband. They're the only people in the room that might not be known to you. We've known each other for years and years. So they came up tonight, which I'm very happy for. Thank you.
The motivation is that if you keep traveling like this, you're going to have to take all of our ceremonies because you're going to end up marrying someone. You've got the baby blessing, and then you might have to do an ascension.
That's true. Actually, I do carry it all, and you have a good point. But everybody does these things on their phone now, Atmajyoti. I cannot. Shankara did a Kriya. I think Abhujra did too. Shankara did a Kriya, and he was scrolling his phone to make sure he covered things. I just found it appalling. But he wasn't even embarrassed. He just did it, I'm just old. That's all.
I guess it's time to go.
Pardon me?
I guess it's time.